welcome to the Bitcoin Business Podcast put on by Sovereign. I'm your host, Brandon Karpeles, and with me today have a very well-known face in the space, and she has just written a book and put it out. She's done tons of work. One of the people I've been following since I began on my journey. I think you might have beat me by like a year or so, but you were in the group of the original handful of folks I was paying attention to and listening to, and it's actually been really cool to see how convicted you've become, how dedicated you are to this, and even putting out the book, which I just read recently, and seeing your commitment to actually trying to help people learn about Bitcoin and understand Bitcoin from a more sort of uh, a more sort of social good, if you will, and that Bitcoin is really, well, the book is Bitcoin is for everyone, and I think that sums up well as to really where you've come in your life. And I've loved to see personally your passion about how you try to bridge the gap, because I do agree that it is easy a lot of times for us to sort of, okay, the TradFi people, the registered investor, the wealth advisors, it's like, hey, there's this thing you can make money. They already kind of understand money. They already kind of understand assets, investing, dollar debasement. But there's a whole nother cohort of people that are just like, I'm in a system that is treating me unfairly. I know I'm being treated unfairly, but I don't know the solution. I don't know how to get out of this system. And I actually just recently interviewed Grant Cardone, and he kind of challenged me. He's like, well, yeah, of course the fiat system's broken. It's always been brought. I was complaining about the rising costs of everything, and you go through in your book in great deal how what you could buy back in the '70s, what it took to afford a home. And he said, well, yeah, nothing's changed. You always had to get out of that system. And he kind of blew my mind a little bit. And it was, yeah, but if you don't know you need to get out of that system, then you're stuck in that system. And I think that's kind of the problem. Is that sort of how you approached your book and what you were looking to get across?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
Of
This has
course.
been such a journey to be on, learning about Bitcoin. And I've gone through an entire transformation, which the people who have read my book, I think you'll see it because I share some personal stories that maybe I haven't gone into in depth on my show. But really, it's been a journey of realizing that we can fix this system. Like we can become empowered. And so many people, I mean, I'm obviously American centric because this is where I live and this is where I focus my work. But around the globe, the majority of people exchange their time for wages. They're wage earners. A lot of them don't own assets, and the system kind of it trains you to think that that's the way things are, and that money loses value, like things just get more expensive and it's out of your control, but it's also okay. In some ways it's like good for us that we have inflation. And learning about Bitcoin changed everything for me because it caused me to question those very things that you sort of come to be complacent about and come to think you can't change. And you learn how to really empower yourself. And so for me, Bitcoin has been this like very transformative personal journey because now I have a lot more hope for the future, and I have more empathy and compassion for just the way that people are behaving and the things that they're resorting to today. Which I kind of, I make a point in the book that we've gotten so political and we're looking for scapegoats, and we're blaming it on this or that. It's the corporations, it's greed, it's this politician. And I challenge us to look deeper. It's actually the financial system and how rotten the incentives are, and how we've built a system, basically a house of cards that benefits the few at the expense of the many. And inflation does benefit the people at the very top. And we need a new system that we can transition to peacefully, that will be more fair. And it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take a lot of work, but it's one that will provide more opportunity for abundance and prosperity for the average person. And that's the world I want to live in. I think a world where very few people own pretty much everything and everyone else is fighting for scraps. That's a very unstable world. That's a world that leads to violent revolutions, understandably, right? Because the majority, the biggest piece of the pie, is saying, this isn't fair and we're going to revolt. And so that's where I think we're at. I feel like we're kind of in a political powder keg, a populism powder keg of people just saying something's wrong, it's not fair, and I'm tired of it. And if Bitcoin didn't exist, I wouldn't have the hope and the positivity I do. But that's why I think the message is so important to get out, because this is the thing. It's like the antidote that will heal so much of the division and frustration, because so many people don't feel economically empowered. And that's what Bitcoin does. And things priced in Bitcoin just get cheaper and more affordable and accessible. And that's why I want everyone in the world to embrace it. And it's going to be a journey, but I want to help people understand that this is a life raft that they need to get on.
It was It's so true, and it was so crazy reading your book. Your story was like my wife's story verbatim. Like the Iron
Oh,
Curtain fell, family came over from Poland. This is the American dream. I'm sure your family was with the lottery system, and then they had to make a decision. Are you going? You had 1 week to decide yes or no, and then you had a month to leave. And so we actually went back to Poland in 2019 and visited the property that my father-in-law and I guess it'd be my uncle-in-law, his brother, were actually building when they decided we're done, we're going to the United States. My father-in-law was an electrician, just like your dad. Lived in a tiny cramped bedroom. They actually lived in the northwest side of Chicago with their cousins, sleeping on couches, three people in a room. I mean, the story was just identical. And
oh wow.
yeah, and they all came here with the same thing, like, oh, there's a better opportunity here. There's more economic opportunity here. And it's funny that you mentioned the fact that we have this crazy wealth concentration, people fighting over scraps. That was the world they left. That was what was going on in the Soviet Union, where all the power, and specifically in Poland, where all the power concentrated at the top. You had this select few that was connected to the government, that was connected to the central bank, that was capable of actually saving. And you mentioned in the book that no one was allowed to save. I remember the stories my mother-in-law tells me of sneaking currency into Slovakia and trading it for wares and bringing it back. And their stores of value were things, because you know hoarding cash could get you put in prison, and Christmas presents were oranges and things like this. And that's exactly what was going on, was because of this monetary system. And they looked over at the United States, and we hadn't completely bastardized the system yet. We were like 20% of the way to ruining it. And then great financial crisis, we were probably halfway there. And then after the great financial crisis, like 95%. And it's just been a massive downhill uh, trajectory ever since. And it's so interesting that people understand inherently that you do need a system where people can earn, where there is a middle class, where um, a society that looks like the United States did in 1994 exists. But that was basically just because we hadn't got the full debasement of our money yet. And inherently, people know this. It plays out in reality, yet at the same time, people still don't understand that that's why what's going on is going on.
Well, something that I try to explain in the book is that when you have a system that's built on the money printer like ours, and it is headquartered in America with the Federal Reserve, the money printer is kind of like a drug. So the initial high is great, and we can build all this stuff. And Americans, certain generations, really benefited from that time because the money printer was going burr, but the consequences of it and all that debt that we had accumulated, we were basically borrowing from the future and pulling all of that forward, and so we weren't feeling the effects. But then you need to print more, just like with a drug. You need to take more to experience the same high, right? And so that's where we're at. And one thing that I learned with Bitcoin, which I try to share in sort of the latter part of the book, is there's an exorbitant privilege that came with being in the dollar system. So when you're not able to print the dollars and work for dollars, and you have to try to exchange other currencies for dollars, you're so far downstream from any advantages. So while the American life was sort of great in the 80s and 90s, and there are so many people who feel nostalgic about that milk and honey era, around the world, there were currency crises happening, right? And my country in particular, Poland, was just emerging out of communism, and no one knew what life was going to look like, and there was so much fear. And that's one of the reasons why my family was willing to sacrifice everything to come, because communism had made such a drastic impact on their sense of hope and opportunity, especially for their children. To your point, I mean, it was life, a life of scarcity. You would wait in line for basic necessities. Sometimes you would get to the front of the line and everything had run out. And my mom would say to me when I was young, she's like, I would have the money and I can't buy anything because the store shelves are empty. And you would have to revert to the black market and sort of this underground economy in order to wheel and deal and try to get things that you actually needed and overpay for them because the government controlled everything. And at one point in time with my grandparents, if they suspected that you have dollars or something, they would actually raid your home and people would tattle on each other. I mean, we saw this in COVID, which was so crazy, right? Like people are tattling on each other, ready to tell. And that's what they experienced. And people like this special police force I wrote in the book would come in and look in your home if you have a form of currency that was illegal. I mean, that so many people can't relate to it in America because they've never experienced it. But here we are, sort of downwind of all this money printing, and now their children are feeling the effects. And it's like, hey, you could afford a home in the 70s on one income. I can't afford it on three. I need like multiple side hustles and I still can't afford it. And so, of course, it's going to lead to the populism that we're seeing and people not knowing who to blame and people becoming tribal and partisan and political. And I think all of our nerve endings are just raw and sensitive. And here we are also with a new tool at our disposal, which is social media, where we can peer into each other's lives and there are algorithms and bots that can manipulate us. And that's the powder keg that I'm referring to. It's like a very sensitive and tense moment in history. And I think it's almost it's almost serendipitous that we have Bitcoin, because I do think that if we just start to slowly empower again the average person with the tools that represent freedom and property rights and sovereignty and the things that are at the core of building something great, I think that that's what will start to heal so many of the wounds that have been broken open by this financial system. And I think it'll over time fix everything from our food system, the way that things are produced, the way buildings are built and created. And I think it will help all of us cooperate better and become better versions of ourselves. And again, that's not an overnight thing, but I think over the long run, Bitcoin represents so much hope that we will have a better society where people feel like they have more opportunity.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the fact that people are on social media, and a lot of the reason people are on social media is because they don't have disposable income. They're stuck in their houses. They're not able to go out. They're not able to go to a concert or go to dinner, things like that. And then, I mean,
Yeah.
without getting too tinfoily hat here, like the psyops are endless. Half these interaction accounts are bots who are just trying to agitate people,
Yeah.
stir up noise. Sometimes you don't even know if it's a real person or if they're just there. And there's, not going too far down the rabbit hole, there's plenty of public information out there about um, state actors trying to throw as much noise as they can out there to deliberately confuse people, and then people get even more
Oh, yeah.
agitated. And
Well, and think of how much less expensive of a national security strategy that even is, right? You
yeah,
don't have to throw bombs at a country. You can just set off millions and millions of online accounts and profiles that stir up our frustrations until we're pitted against each other and we're just fighting ourselves as opposed to fighting anyone else. So it is really interesting to look at it from that perspective. And I do think I've mentioned on some shows, and I think it's kind of clear through the book if you read it, that um, technologies are tools. You can use them for good or bad. Bitcoin is a tool that you can use for good or bad. And ultimately social media, I think that if we weren't so frustrated and divided, we could use that tool for something much better that connects us and empowers us and allows us to learn and grow and really connect with each other more, which is what it's kind of meant for, as opposed to being the weapon that it is sometimes, with just everyone turning against each other and spreading, the worst sides of society.
And it also gives you an opportunity to step back and go enjoy your life. Like, I know since I found Bitcoin,
Yeah.
as I've gotten deeper into Bitcoin, as I've accumulated more Bitcoin, as I've started taking agency over my life, as I've started, getting my autonomy back, I've noticed I want to be on there less and less. Like, the agitation, it's actually agitating. Like, I don't want to be
Yeah.
agitated. I would like to go, you know, away from that and be calm and be still and raise my family and spend time with my wife, spend time with my kids, spend time with my family, as opposed to constantly having to, like, just always in the rat race, got to keep going, got to get the next thing, got to pay attention to this. And I do think there is a lot of it is that when you take away financial security, when you take away future certainty about your financial position, that you fall much more prey to things like the agitation that's going on in social media, and that there would actually be a reduction in use and agitation in everything from social media if people knew, if they were like, hey, I don't have to worry about 10, 20 years from now, my future's good. I've got a plan. In 5 years I'm going to be able to buy a house because my money is
Yeah.
appreciating faster than a consumable good. I mean, it's absolutely preposterous that our money cannot keep up with a consumption good. I mean, that is a
Yeah.
totally insane proposition. So um
I agree.
yeah. And
I agree.
it's you mentioned food, and aside from all the how we've completely destroyed our food and poisoned everything, and everyone's fat and sick and has diabetes, and we've just it's a crime. It's a crime. The fact that people aren't more upset about what we've done to our food supply is insane. But you mentioned in the book that tens of mil, and you said this number, and I had to do a double take, and I actually wrote it down, that tens of millions of people are going to food banks. And I noticed, I've been living in Chicago, in the actual city of Chicago, for about 20 years, and I never saw anyone I didn't even know where food pantries were. I didn't know where food banks were. And I drove through bad neighborhoods on my way to work. I drove everywhere. Top to bottom, east, north, south, east, west, throughout the city. I never saw food pantries, lines for food pantries. And now, in the last, call it 3 to 4 years, I see people. There's a church behind my place, and every Monday morning they're lining up out. Every Monday and Thursday morning they're lining up out there for food. I drive down North Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare in Chicago. Multiple food pantries. People lined up everywhere. On Sheridan, not too far from my house. Food pantries everywhere. It's so anecdotally, I said to my wife, I go, where did all this come from? Are people just gaming the system more, or people that actually need this? I don't really know what's going on, but that number just stuck out to me, was shocking, and I noticed it firsthand, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I also witnessed being a reporter for 10 years, because we would cover, food lines and food drives. And it just was so clear to me year after year that more and more people were dependent on that. And that's one of the things that I think is actually a crisis, is how many people are truly dependent on the government, which is why it's always so scary when you look at the sort of the tab, and we can't afford it, right? We're like paying our Visa with our MasterCard, which is something I share in the book. But if we cut off these programs, people literally are going to be starving, because so many people have become dependent on the government, which is why I think people should be angry and calling for accountability when there are fraud allegations. Because if there are people that are taking advantage of the system to the tune of millions of dollars, like that's our money. That's our money being stolen. And there needs to be a sense of accountability. Like these, if you're going to receive taxpayer funds, there have to be benchmarks, and there have to be ways that you can audit how the money is spent, because it's really unfair and it is frustrating. And there are some statistics out there that show that potentially a giant chunk of our expenditures are just fraudulent and wasteful. And that's not fair, because we work so hard, and that's contributing to all of the ultimately the inflation and the monetary debasement of our purchasing power is because the government has to keep spending to finance these programs. And what I think we should judge the success of a society by is actually how few people are dependent on these programs. Whereas I feel like some aspects of our government or different agencies or organizations, they see it as a success if these programs are helping so many people. I say no. It's successful if those programs are not necessary to help people. People need to be able to survive on their own and take care of themselves and afford things. But unfortunately, as we can see, there's someone taking a fee or a tax or a toll from you at every turn. And that's one thing that I think again can be addressed by something like Bitcoin, because it allows you to simplify the whole system, and it does make governments and organizations and companies more accountable, because it's a truly transparent ledger and no one can manipulate it to their advantage. So I really think this is one of the reasons why we need to kind of come together and rally behind a movement like Bitcoin, because otherwise the system that we currently have is going to lead to total destruction. I think it's going to lead to the destruction of society morally, economically, and ultimately I think it will lead to violence, and we are better than that. So if we just fix the money, we would fix a lot of the other issues, but it's still a journey to teach people that the money's broken.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, these programs, they claim they're helping people. They're really hampering people. I mean, I know the example's been used 800 times. It's nothing original, but it's like the don't feed the bears. They need to be able to forage on their own. They need to be able to hunt on their own. And humans are no different in that respect. And when you take away the ability for someone to provide for themselves, to have autonomy, you're actually stripping them of their dignity. They're actually
Yes.
you're stealing their soul. You're stealing
Yeah.
um their sense of being an individual. And I 100% agree. I do think, over time that Bitcoin does fix this issue, will solve this issue, and I think there will be a slow change of people that actually want their agency back. And we are
Yeah.
going through a fourth turning, and maybe we need to exit this and enter the first turning to get a group of people that are willing to take that agency. I'm curious, do you even think it's possible to convince the number of people um that are getting help, aid, welfare, whatever you want to call it, and even say, hey, we need to change here, we got to get off this system. It might be hard, you might actually have to go do things, but life will be better. I'm a bit of I'm very optimistic. I'm very white pilled. I couldn't be more excited about the bright orange future ahead of us, but I am very nihilistic when it comes to believing that we could actually convince such a large portion of the population that they would be better off like on their own. But curious to what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything's possible, but of course there are some really big challenges, especially when people have become dependent on the system. And what's sad is if you look out, a lot of people have gone down the path of just this victim mentality, right? Like things are happening to me and I ultimately need someone to come in and rescue me, and that's a very dangerous mentality to be in. And it's also hard to pull someone out of that. You kind of have to do it yourself. That's one thing that I've learned too. It's like people have different rock bottoms, and then they have to like pull themselves out. But I do, to your point, I think that sometimes we're we're too kind, right? Or we're too helpful. The suicidal empathy kind of keywords that are buzzworthy lately. If you keep saving someone that is making the same mistake over and over and over again, they're not learning anything. And that's one thing that I think our system does. And again, like there's never any accountability, because when you print money and the insiders benefit, and then they can reward their other, the insiders, and it's kind of a feedback loop. You create this monster, and that's how I kind of see this bureaucratic welfare state that has been created over the years, where it's very difficult, we saw with Doge or anything, to kind of chip away at any part of that, because it's grown so powerful and it feeds into itself, and so many people are dependent on it that it's difficult to get consensus in order to break it apart. And they make it seem as if, like the the world will fall apart if you do. And that's frustrating as well, because I think back on my family coming here. They didn't ask for anything. They did not come here to get handouts from the government. And the thought that like people would come here and not have pride and not want to learn the language and wave the flag and embrace our principles and our values and the things that this nation was founded on, and instead just want to extract value and try to manipulate the system or try to gain favor and then get, get like funds from the government. That's taxpayer money, and then kick it to the politician that's just going to give them more. That is so corrupt and evil. And that's where, again, like you need a system of accountability and transparency where you can't keep printing units. No one can dilute you. Because the system right now, it's rotten to its core. And Jeff Booth and I did a really fascinating show recently where we talked about capitalism. It's being demonized lately. Everyone's turning to socialism, which is sort of understandable when you get to this point in the debt cycle or in the sort of economy where everything is so top heavy, the few have so much and everyone else has nothing at all. And so the political forces turn us against each other, and they're proposing ideas that literally my family and your wife's family fled. The idea that you don't own your own property, right? It's a collective good. We're all going to share, and it sounds the warmth of collectivism. Collectivism has been responsible for hundreds of millions of deaths, and like people are getting brainwashed, and so that's why I think again it's important that we teach people, and it's not easy. To your point, it's a really big challenge because once people develop a negative frame of mind and find things online that reinforce it, it's hard to pull them out, but it is possible, I think.
Yeah, by the way, if people haven't listened to Natalie's interview with Jeff Booth, everyone should go listen to that episode. That was it's very rare I these days that I am taken aback by a podcast, but that one, I mean, that Jeff is just such a great thinker, and
Yeah.
that was such a great interview. I had multiple people that I didn't even know listen to Bitcoin podcasts and stuff reach out to me and be like, "You hear this interview that Jeff Booth did with Natalie Brunell?" And I was like, "Yeah, man,
Yeah.
one of the best pods I've heard in a while." So everyone should go listen to that one.
Thank you.
But what you're talking about is sort of this. It almost behooves you to act irresponsibly, right? And you bring this point up in the
Yeah.
book when you talk about a central bank and going back to the era of free banking, and you actually talked with Jeff a little bit about this as well. Whereas the reality is, we should have just let these banks fail, and the banks would have failed, and the individuals making the decision to park their money there would have learned a very valuable lesson. But the bankers would have learned an extra valuable lesson, but instead we just have this central bank that papers over it. So now the depositor is going, I don't need to do any due diligence on the banks I'm working with, and then the bankers are going, I don't need to make any good financial decisions because they're just going to bail me out, and I would actually be a sucker not to. I mean, I have a family. There were like three families behind me. Fortunately, they've been forced out of their place due to being quite a problem in the neighborhood. But anyways, they this idea of why would I go work? That's just foolish. Why would I go do that? I have this system that rewards negative behavior. If I don't have a job, if I don't have a husband, if I have seven kids in the house with me, I get more money. I get better things. I can afford more things the more degenerate I live my life. And you get this negative feedback loop of you're actually encouraging poor decisions, and that's obviously a huge part of the degradation that's going on here.
Yeah, and one thing that I want to share is so Bitcoin really does introduce consequences into the system again, and it forces economic reality in that we've suspended for a long time. And so, to your free banking example, right? Because a lot of people bring that up, like, oh, that wildcat era, things were so crazy. That
They
was
weren't crazy
more of a
enough, I think. Yeah.
well, it was more of a free market, right? Like it wasn't perfect. And that's kind of what Jeff Booth talked
Yep.
about in my show. But in this system where we were on the gold standard, the banks would paper over it. But at first it started with a constraint, and you wouldn't issue too many paper claims to the amount of gold you had. But then the banks would notice, oh, not everybody's getting their gold, right? We'll issue some more receipts. And then it ballooned and it got worse and it got worse. And the banks obviously took on this additional risk. They were greedy. We're all self-interested, so like the different banks had different behavior. But when it came time for everyone, to come claim their gold, and the whole system blew up because it was clearly a bubble of paper claims, that's when we came to a moment and we decided, should we allow the banks to fail and everyone lose their money in the banks? Or should we bail them out? Should we have this lender of last resort, a central bank, where we essentially kind of kick it up the chain, eventually to the taxpayer, to bail everyone out to keep the system stable? And we chose the lender of last resort. But with Bitcoin, that doesn't exist. Like
Well, seven people chose
impossible.
that, but yeah,
Well, right,
yeah.
but like,
No,
at
I
the
know.
time they did get a lot of
Oh, yeah,
public support for this because they made it seem like the other system is so volatile and risky and this one is the safety net that we all need, and they made it sound all warm and fuzzy as they always do. But what's so great about Bitcoin is will never have that bailout. You have to be more careful. The banks, if they take on too much risk, you can't paper over it and make up new Bitcoin that doesn't exist from thin air. You can do that with paper. And that's what I think ultimately led to the failure of the gold standard, was the fact that being physical and being difficult to scale and settle over long distances, that was the Achilles heel. So we papered over it, we abstracted it, and that is what ultimately led to a system that is backed by nothing. It's backed by, you know, the US military and the full faith of the government. Well, it's technically backed by literally nothing. We're just going to print what we need, and the purchasing power of everyone's money and savings is going to be destroyed. Bitcoin returns us to a sound system that you cannot do that. So if you make a mistake, if you take on too much risk, you're going to have to bear the consequences. You cannot kick it up to the next guy or the next generation or the taxpayer. And that, I think, is the best part about Bitcoin, because you survive on merit and value alone. You cannot game the system and take advantage of your position in society.
you can't hide from reality, if you will. And
Yeah.
so, along these lines, as we're talking about money printing, you had a quote in the book. I'm curious. You were talking about this idea that Bitcoin is a proof of work network. You have to expend energy. Sure, all Bitcoiners know this. And you had the quote, because you can't print energy any more than you can make it rain. And I read that and I was like, okay, obviously she means you can't control the weather. But I was curious, was there a double entendre in there with like shelling out, dollar bills at an inappropriate establishment or something like that? Or was that just me making that leap?
I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, I tried to make as many analogies and use my words as a form of currency and pick them very carefully. But yeah, you can't make it rain. Well, and even that, right? You can question today because we've got all sorts of
Well,
technologies
yeah,
like cloud seeding.
yes. Yeah, they were doing that
um,
outside my place yesterday, just line after line after line.
Yeah, but like, I mean, technically, yeah, you can make it rain with paper dollar bills. But it is, I think it's so important. And I took the time to be careful about how I share the energy component, because I think I didn't appreciate just energy in general as the currency of the universe. I think I share that quote in the book. Um, we take it for granted so much. Like, we live in a place, most of us that are probably watching this, you're watching it on a screen, you flip on a light switch to get your power, you go to the grocery store to get your food. Like, these are very energy intensive things where a lot of people had to come together and coordinate, and massive industries and infrastructure are behind you being able to turn on that computer or go to the grocery store and pick up your food. And energy is something that it's a good thing. Like, we need it. We need more of it, especially if it's utilized in a positive, productive way. But people get so scared by that. It's like it uses too much energy or this or that, or it's going to be competing. And I wanted to dispel some of that through the book. So I took the time to be thoughtful about the mining chapter and the energy component, because at the end of the day, when you do zoom out, that is the source of truth in Bitcoin. It is a ledger backed by energy, backed by math and physics, something that no one can control, and no one has like some sort of magical power. None of us can print more time, none of us can make energy out of thin air, and so that like sets that base layer of fairness in the system. So the idea of having an energy backed currency actually dates back more than a century. Henry Ford wrote about it in papers, how great that would be. And Satoshi made it happen. Satoshi brought us that breakthrough. So it's incredible. And today I think energy is going to be more and more important when it comes to the conversation about the AI transition. And so people should really take the Bitcoin energy component seriously and realize that it's the most one of the most positive aspects to the Bitcoin network.
Yeah, along those lines with I had an epiphany this week, or maybe it was a week and a half. But even talking about having to expend real world energy, I'm kind of a old world conspiracist, Tartaria, whatever you want to call me, and I believe we were able to pull energy out of the ether and use mercury to charge rods and airships and all these things. But what's so mind blowing about Bitcoin is that even with free energy that we could pull out of the atmosphere, we still have to expend that energy. And guess what? Blocks are still coming every 10 minutes. Everyone in the world could have access to free energy and it doesn't affect Bitcoin. Like that completely blew my mind. We could 1,000x the amount of terahash that's being pointed at the network right now, and we're still getting blocks every 10 minutes,
Yeah.
which is absolutely crazy. And you still got to get the energy, you still got to build the stuff to conduct the energy and spend real world, however it works, you still have to put the work in, you still have to harness the energy. And to that point, you had you had you had such a great quote in there. I found it so profound. I don't know if you even thought about this twice or it was just something you put in there, but you said we benefit from these systems without questioning their environmental impact because the value seems self-evident. And that is just everyone is living in such a world of abundance and incredible things. Like you said, just turning your light on, the fact I'm talking into this microphone, the fact I'm looking at this
Yeah.
computer, that I'm having this conversation. We don't even think it's like so self obviously this is a good idea, but it's for some reason it's like when we're talking about a fair monetary system that, by the way, uses less energy than our current monetary system uses, which is a whole nother, you know, uh, insanity that it's half or even less than a quarter of what our current financial system's using to have property rights for 8 billion people and to be able to have a money that can't be corrupted, that's not controlled by anyone. Like to me, that's the most self-evident thing
Yeah.
ever. Like it's so obvious, but for some reason we can't see that. We're not we,
Yeah, I
but
mean, it's because so many
yes,
people just don't understand Bitcoin, so they can't appreciate that that's the ultimate use case for
yes,
energy, right? This
yeah.
global incorruptible protocol that can allow all of us to exchange value with one another. And yeah, I think energy use is widely misunderstood. And so I tried to put it into perspective, showing even different industries how much they use in comparison to Bitcoin, and to help us appreciate things like we need electricity. Like some groups and some organizations want to demonize today the use of electricity or energy, and it's like that is what propels society forward. And the areas of the world that have the most access to energy are the ones that are the most productive and have the highest standard of living, and women have the most rights in those areas. Like if you go to the areas that are blacked out, I mean, you see a complete difference, right? And there are billions, unfortunately, of people that are still in that area that Bitcoin can now incentivize the build out of productivity and of infrastructure, because they are sometimes located near natural sources, renewable sources of energy that can be tapped into with, location agnostic Bitcoin miners, and can finally electrify communities, which is why I find so much hope in some of the global, mining operations that Bitcoiners have built, because there are like I don't know what the exact statistic is, because Alex Epstein I think has the exact numbers, but I think it's like somewhere around 2 billion people in the world don't have enough electricity to power like a refrigerator, like the standard refrigerator. They're left behind. And Bitcoin, I think, is a way to not only empower them with like a form of money that can't be debased and that they can save in and exchange, but also it will incentivize them to have electricity in communities that have never had it before. And that electricity and energy will allow them to be more productive and be more engaged in like the global economy.
Yeah, energy equals prosperity. It's just a one to
Yeah.
one correlation. The most
Yeah.
the most energy rich nations are the most prosperous. It's just
Exactly.
completely. undeniable. So, um, one thing before I know your work coming up on time here, but one thing before I get to the last question I want to ask you, I noticed in the book you called them bitcoins. What's you're a plural Bitcoin person, huh?
Well, so I share in the book that I capitalize B, singular, Bitcoin as the network. So Bitcoin, and I use that most like colloquially when I'm speaking, like I refer to Bitcoin in the singular capital, but the individual asset or token that moves on the network, I lowercase it. And so I refer to it as Bitcoin or Bitcoins.
Yeah,
So, but for me, it was helpful to actually understand the difference between the token versus the
right.
network because I feel like people, they take that for granted how special Bitcoin is. It's not just a token because like a token, you can kind of, we have all these altcoins and we have stable coins and we have the dollar and everything's going to be tokenized. And there's going to be probably a central entity that issues those tokens. But this is a truly unique one. This is the one that is born through the proof of work process, the consensus mechanism, and travels on this network. And that protocol is just as important as the asset because the protocol allows us through these rules to interact with anyone around the world in a trust minimized way, and to be able to verify everything whenever we want. And like that network is just as important. The protocol, which I describe in like chapter 14, is just as important as the asset side of it.
Yeah, I would, I'm more of a Bitcoin is Bitcoin, kind of like a deer is a deer, and then there's multiple deer. But it's more of it's just a silly argument
Yeah.
that has no right answer. But anyways, um, so the last thing I wanted to get to is, I know you were talking on a podcast recently. I forget if it was your own or you were a guest somewhere, and you were talking about how Bitcoin really has brought you back to your faith. That you have gotten a lot more into that, and I share similar stories where I wasn't some hedonistic psychopath or anything like that, and I went to church every now and again, and still believed in God and all those sorts of things. But I really didn't take it so seriously to the extent I do now, until I really understood Bitcoin. I really lowered my time preference, the value of faith. I started to actually, feel the faith that this wasn't a box to check or a gateway to, heaven in the afterlife. That this is something I feel, something I believe in that's actually materially affecting my life. And I want to put time and effort and energy into it. And I was curious if you felt the same way, or this is something you came about separately, or if it's something you don't want to talk about or don't feel comfortable with, that's cool too.
No, I love talking about it. I narrated God Bless Bitcoin
Yep.
for a reason.
Great documentary movie. What would you
Yeah, it's a great if you want a
yeah.
documentary kind
Okay,
of
yeah.
intro to Bitcoin, it's a
Yeah.
good one.
Shared it with many
I
people.
I think that everyone's journey of faith is so it's obviously very personal, but they can be very, very interesting journeys that take you in directions that you might not expect. And I grew up Catholic and I went to a Christian school. But I think fiat caused me to question my faith. Um, because how can you think that there is some ultimate good and that things are meant to be when you look out and you see very good people struggling and you see people who are playing by all the rules, doing all the right things, and they're constantly being pushed down by a system that rewards literally the most corrupt individuals. And how can you not sit there and go, where is God in this? And how is this so unfair? And so that's what I actually one of the things I love about Bitcoin is it's brought me closer to faith because even if you like a fun experiment that I did was when all these AIs were, coming out, I asked different ones like what if if there is a God and God created money, what would that form of money look like? And literally almost all of them came back with a description that sounded exactly like Bitcoin, and most of them actually said the thing that looks closest to this is Bitcoin. So it was really interesting because in the book of Job and in the Bible, which I studied in school, but you just kind of sometimes when you're younger you read it because you kind of feel forced or obligated to, but it doesn't make that kind of impression on you than it does when you are older and more experienced. But there are so many parts of the book that teach you, and C.S. Lewis also does this with his writing of like why human suffering should not push you away from God. It should pull you closer to God because yes, tragedies will happen, but we um we are connected to something so much bigger and more powerful. And I feel like the one thing that I've learned, especially through my reporting and through my Bitcoin journey, is most of us have a lot in common. We want to feel the same things. We want to feel a sense of connection and belonging, and love is important to us. And we're pulled to do the right thing. We know a sense of right and wrong, even if we sometimes don't make the right choices. And it all leads to like this bigger, where did we come from? Where does all this come from? And when you look at science and nature and physics and chemistry and how perfectly engineered it is, it causes you to appreciate an ultimate creator much more. And so I've gone on a really enriching journey with my faith where now I believe more than ever. And I really feel like Bitcoin came to us at the right time when we needed it the most. And it allows you to really like become the best version of yourself where you stop thinking about surviving in the moment like the fiat world does to you, right? Like, oh, like, what am I going to do am I going to be able to pay for this or that? Am I going to be able to afford a family and this person has more than me and I don't like that? It causes you to wash all of that away and think, okay, now like what can I build? What can I give? How can I be of service? What am I meant to do? What is my calling? What is my purpose? What makes me the happiest? Like that's the world I want everyone to exist in because that mentality creates all sorts of positive side effects in your life, that law of attraction. And so that's the world I think we can build with Bitcoin. And look, I mean, again, everyone's personal faith journey is different, but I think it's not shocking that so many Bitcoiners are very faithful or religious people.
Man, that's your point about the suffering. That was, I think it was 2 days ago. I do a daily devotional, and the whole devotional was about suffering as a Christian, and that you actually can't appreciate suffering if you're not a Christian, if you're not in faith. You don't,
Yeah.
just like you said, just how if there's a God, how could we have a money like this? And it's like that's actually God talking to you and pulling you to him if you believe. But if you want to reject him, you're just going to be dark and angry. As these people are
Right. We
on
have free will. Right.
exactly. And these people they argue with me on Noster and it's you say don't trust verify for Bitcoin, but for religion, you're just trusting. And it's like, dude, I've verified, man. Like I've been to dark places, I've been to the lowest of lows. And when you pray, when you feel that spiritual connection, when you know there's evil around you or there's good around you, and you experience the dark and the light, there is nothing more verifying to me than the lived experience I have when I am in connection with my faith, when I humble myself before God, when I don't put myself first, when He's first. And you really do have to live that to
Yeah.
understand it. But um,
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw in the episode, there's this great comedian who has a sketch about the God people versus the, nothing happens when you die people or nothing,
yes,
nothing created this. And
yeah,
it's so good. Like I recommend just Google it. It's like, the nothing versus the God people. And it's really poignant. And it's like at some point, those people are choosing to believe that as well. And so I feel very firm and good in my faith, and a lot of that did come from my Bitcoin journey as well.
it's just like Bitcoin. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's like
Yeah,
once you see God, once you see Him doing something in your life, you're like, oh man, okay, well, that I mean, that happened. That now I can't unsee it. So it
yeah, for
it
sure.
is. All right, well, Natalie, thank you so much for your time. Probably a good point to wrap here. Enjoyed reading the book. And by the way, the book is Bitcoin for Everyone. And it really is actually it's sovereign. It's actually one of our recommended starter books for people to
Thank you.
yeah, people that are just learning about Bitcoin, maybe for the first time, or maybe have heard about it and want to learn more. It really is a good primer. And even as someone who is an experienced Bitcoiner, there were some analogies, like the hashing analogy and the smoothie in the book. Like I had never thought of it that way. I don't know if that's a common analogy, and I've just never
Thanks.
heard it, but I really like that and stuff. So there's
Thank
there's
you.
some good things to glean out of there, even if you are an experienced Bitcoiner. But for the person in your life, someone maybe looking to learn more that wants to get better educated, it really is a great book. It's easy to read too. It's not overly complicated. There's not, it's not deep economic theory or thoughts or anything. It's just very simple, easy to understand, which I think as Bitcoiners, we get bogged down a lot with not being clear. Like it's clear to us because we've spent 10,000 hours doing this, but to the rest of the world, we might as well be speaking in tongues. And it's like, I think your
Yeah.
book did a really good job of distilling it down into language that's digestible for anyone. So the people that haven't done, thousands of hours of studying Bitcoin. So, um, Natalie, where should people find you? Obviously, as I said, the book is Bitcoin for Everyone. Where can people buy that, and then where can people check you out as well?
Yeah, thank you so much for the positive feedback. I really do appreciate it. If you've read it, please share a 5-star review if you can, because I didn't realize this, but they really help. They help your book in terms of new readers finding it. So if you've read it and you liked it, please consider doing that. It's available wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's getting into more and more stores, which is exciting. My goal is to be in the airports, but hasn't happened yet. But thank you. It was a labor of love, and I tried to make the most approachable introduction to Bitcoin that I could. It's not too technical, it's not academic. It's really for everyone. That was the goal. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. Well, you can always do the Daniel Prince move where you just take a stack of your books and put them in the airport, and not tell anyone about it, which is what one of my favorite stories. I love it. But um,
That's fun.
yeah, so I think at Natalie Brunell on all the different platforms is that.
Yes,
Yeah.
Nat
Okay.
Brunell
Or
on
Nat
Twitter,
Brunell. Yes.
Natalie
Yes.
Brunell on Instagram. Just make sure to look out for blue check marks. I get so sad when I hear from people who found an account, they thought it was me, it was not me. I don't ask for money. Like, please make sure that the pages are verified. Do not start talking to impersonators. Scams are everywhere, so just be really careful.
Yeah, I mean, and you're on Noster as well. For
Mhm.
a lot of our listeners are Noster folk as well.
Yeah,
So um,
yeah.
find her on there. As always, I'm Plebianon on Noster. Sovereign. You can find us on Twitter, Noster, Instagram, all the great sites out there. LinkedIn, if I forgot that one, at Sovereign SOVREIGN, and on Twitter, it's at SovereignX, and that's the only difference. The website, sovereign.io. Come check us out, leave us a note, and we will get back to you. So thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
Yeah.